It was 9:47 p.m. over the Red Sea, and the sky above the southern approach to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait was absolutely clear. No clouds, no haze, the kind of hard equatorial darkness that makes the stars look close enough to touch, and the horizon sharp as a knife edge against the faint phosphorescence of the water below. The Red Sea, in this season, runs warm and flat in the evenings, and from the bridge of any ship in the operating area, you could see 50 miles in every direction without obstruction. It looked peaceful. The Red Sea always looks peaceful from the surface, which is why the people running operations in the combat information centers below those bridges never let themselves be fooled by what the surface looked like. USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, CVN-69, a Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, had been operating in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden theater for 51 days. Carrier Strike Group 2. The Eisenhower, the Ike, to everyone who served aboard her, was the centerpiece of the most sustained American carrier combat deployment in the Red Sea since the 1991 Gulf War, conducting continuous strike operations against Houthi targets in Yemen in response to the Houthi campaign against international shipping in one of the world's most critical maritime transit corridors. The Air Wing had logged over 1,000 combat sorties since entering the theater. The crew was experienced, trained down to a sharp edge by 7 weeks of continuous combat operations, and tired in the specific way that professionals get tired when they have been doing hard work every day for a long time. Not broken, not degraded, but carrying the weight of sustained effort in the way that makes judgment careful and reactions fast. The strike group's defensive architecture on this particular evening was formidable by any measure. USS Philippine Sea, CG-58, the Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser assigned to the group, carried 122 vertical launch system cells loaded with a carefully calculated mix of weapons. SM-3 Block IIA ballistic missile interceptors, SM-6 dual-role interceptors, SM-2 Block IIIB medium-range air defense missiles, and evolved Sea Sparrow missiles for the inner defensive layer. 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, USS Mason, DDG-87, and USS Gravely, DDG-107, held their positions in the strike group screen, each carrying 96 VLS cells with their own mix of interceptors. A land-based AN/TPY-2 forward-based radar, operated by U.S. Army personnel from a site in Djibouti, approved under a bilateral defense cooperation agreement, was scanning the Yemeni coast with the specific lookup radar geometry that makes it particularly effective against ballistic missile launches. And the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye, assigned to the Eisenhower's Air Wing, had been airborne continuously since 6 a.m., rotating crews through the orbit every 6 hours, maintaining a 24-hour air picture over the entire theater. The Houthi ballistic missile program had been a known concern since the earliest days of the Yemeni civil war, when Iranian technical advisors began transferring increasingly capable weapons to Ansar Allah. The Zulfiqar, named for the legendary sword of Imam Ali, is the most advanced ballistic missile in the Houthi arsenal as of this operation. A single-stage, solid-fueled, short-range ballistic missile with an estimated range of 700 to 1,000 kilometers, a separating reentry vehicle, and a claimed circular error, probable that Houthi spokesmen have asserted, without credible evidence, is sufficient for precision strikes against naval vessels underway. The missile is an Iranian design, almost certainly a variant of the Fateh 110 family, and it represents a genuine capability upgrade over the older Scud-derived liquid-fueled weapons the Houthis had previously employed. Solid fuel means faster launch preparation. A separating reentry vehicle means a slightly more complex intercept problem. Iranian engineers had worked on this weapon for years. The Houthis had trained on it. They believed it was capable of killing an aircraft carrier. At 9:41 p.m., the AN/TPY-2 radar at Djibouti detected a launch from a site approximately 85 kilometers north of Sana'a in the Yemeni highlands. The launch signature was immediate and unambiguous: the bright infrared bloom of a solid-fuel rocket motor igniting, the track climbing steeply from a transporter erector launcher that had been in position at the site for less than 40 minutes. A launch preparation time significantly shorter than the liquid-fueled systems the Houthis had previously used, and a deliberate operational security measure designed to compress the window between site exposure and launch. The TPY-2 had the track within 6 seconds of motor ignition. The track data was in the CTF-153 Operations Center in Bahrain, in the Eisenhower's Combat Information Center, and in the Aegis networks of USS Philippine Sea, USS Mason, and USS Gravely within 11 seconds of the launch event, via the Ballistic Missile Defense System's integrated data architecture that links ground-based radars, shipborne Aegis systems, and theater command centers into a single, coherent ballistic missile defense picture. 6 seconds from launch to detection. 11 seconds from launch to full theater awareness. The Houthi launch crew had not yet finished their post-launch egress procedures when the entire U.S. defensive architecture in the Red Sea theater had a complete, continuously updated track on their missile. The Zulfiqar climbed through 40,000 feet on its boost phase, accelerating through Mach 5 as its motor burned, the infrared signature bright and clean against the cold upper atmosphere. The AN/SPY-1B radar aboard USS Philippine Sea acquired the track at 9:43 p.m. as the missile climbed above the radar horizon, cross-referencing the contact with the TPY-2 track data that was already in the Aegis system via Link 16. The cross-reference was instant. Same object, same track, full ballistic trajectory solution computed and updating continuously as the missile climbed toward apogee. The Aegis combat system began computing intercept options from the moment of acquisition, presenting the TAO aboard Philippine Sea with a layered engagement menu that started with the SM-3 Block IIA for exoatmospheric intercept and included SM-6 as a backup option for endo-atmospheric engagement, if the SM-3 did not achieve a kill. The TAO looked at the display for 3 seconds. He called the captain. He said, "Sir, ballistic missile track, assessed as Zulfiqar variant, trajectory solution puts the impact point at Carrier Strike Group 2. Request weapons free SM-3. The captain said, "Weapons free." The TAO turned back to his display and authorized the engagement. The authorization took 11 seconds from the captain entering the CIC to the firing order. The entire sequence from launch detection to weapons-free authorization, 64 seconds. Let's take a moment to understand what that number means, because it is the product of decades of engineering, doctrine development, and institutional investment that has no parallel in any other nation's ballistic missile defense architecture. 64 seconds. In that time, a sensor system on the ground in Djibouti detected a ballistic missile launch in the Yemeni highlands, transmitted that data through a secure satellite-linked network to a ship 340 nautical miles away in the Red Sea. The ship's Aegis combat system acquired the track on its own radar, cross-referenced 2 independent sensor feeds, computed a complete ballistic trajectory solution, including predicted impact point and intercept geometry, presented a layered engagement menu to the TAO, and obtained command authorization for a weapons employment decision. 64 seconds. The Zulfiqar was still in its boost phase when the decision to destroy it had been made. The Houthi missile was at apogee, 480 kilometers above the Red Sea, its reentry vehicle separating from the spent booster stage and orienting for its terminal descent, when the SM-3 Block IIA missile left its VLS cell aboard USS Philippine Sea at 9:46 p.m. The SM-3's three-stage solid fuel booster accelerated the interceptor through Mach 15 on a climbing intercept trajectory, the third stage burning out above the atmosphere and releasing the kinetic warhead, the 21-pound Houthi that is the SM-3's terminal kill vehicle, guided by its own onboard infrared seeker and three-axis divert and attitude control system. The kill vehicle, separated from the third stage at an altitude of 120 kilometers, oriented itself toward the descending Houthi reentry vehicle and began the final intercept sequence. The Zulfiqar's reentry vehicle was attempting to do what it was designed to do: maneuver. The separating reentry vehicle included a basic attitude control system that the Iranian engineers who designed it had incorporated specifically to complicate exo-atmospheric intercept. The reentry vehicle made a lateral maneuver of approximately 180 meters at 90 kilometers altitude, a modest correction within the capability of its control system, designed to defeat a non-maneuvering interceptor on a pure pursuit course. The SM-3 kill vehicle's divert and attitude control system registered the maneuver, pulsed the appropriate combination from its 180 individual divert motors, and corrected its own course within 0.3 seconds. The maneuver had moved the aim point. The kill vehicle moved with it. The intercept occurred at 91 kilometers altitude above the atmosphere, in the silence of near space where the Red Sea and the Yemeni highlands and the carrier strike group below were equally invisible and equally irrelevant to the mathematics of a 21-pound kinetic warhead closing on a reentry vehicle at a combined velocity that released more energy on impact than a military vehicle moving at highway speed hitting a solid wall. The Zulfiqar's reentry vehicle ceased to exist as a coherent object. The debris, fragments of the reentry vehicle casing, the warhead, the guidance components, was scattered across a volume of near space from which it would fall back through the atmosphere and burn up long before reaching the surface of the Red Sea. At 9:48 p.m., the SM-3 kill vehicle's infrared seeker transmitted its terminal engagement data back through the Aegis communications link, and the Aegis combat system aboard USS Philippine Sea updated the track from engaged to destroyed. The entire sequence, launch, detection, authorization, intercept, had taken 7 minutes and 14 seconds. The Zulfiqar had been destroyed 91 kilometers above the Earth, approximately 60 nautical miles northeast of the Eisenhower's position, before its reentry vehicle had completed 30% of its terminal descent trajectory. The Eisenhower's Combat Information Center received the engagement confirmation at 9:48 p.m. The officer of the deck noted it in the ship's log. The strike planning team working on the next day's air tasking order continued their work. The Ike's captain was briefed in 43 words. He acknowledged, asked one question about SM-3 magazine status, received a satisfactory answer, and returned to reviewing the air plan. General quarters was not called. The flight deck crew was not disrupted. The 18 aircraft staged for the 10:30 p.m. launch cycle continued their pre-flight preparation in the familiar organized chaos of carrier night operations, their crews entirely unaware that a ballistic missile had been fired at their ship 7 minutes earlier and destroyed in space before any of them had felt the slightest tremor. but the Houthis were not finished. At 9:52 p.m., 4 minutes after the SM-3 intercept, the AN/TPY-2 radar in Djibouti registered a second launch from the same site north of Sinai. Same launch signature, same track profile. The Houthi launch crew had reloaded and fired a second Zulfiqar from a pre-positioned second TEL at the same site. A two-shot volley designed to exploit the possibility that the American defensive system, having just fired an SM-3, might be cycling its missile inventory and briefly less capable of engaging a follow-on launch. The possibility was not unreasonable as a concept. It was wrong as applied to the USS Philippine Sea's actual magazine status and the Aegis system's actual engagement tempo. The Philippine Sea had not expended a significant fraction of her SM-3 inventory. The Aegis system had not required recovery time between engagements. The TAO authorized the second engagement before the track had been airborne for 45 seconds. The second SM-3 Block IIA launch was textbook. The intercept was clean, this time at 97 kilometers altitude, the reentry vehicle maneuvering slightly earlier in its descent, but the kill vehicle correcting within the margins of its control authority. Destroyed. The debris field was 12 kilometers northwest of the first intercept point, two slightly different approach geometries producing two slightly different debris distribution patterns in the upper atmosphere above the Red Sea, both of them equally irrelevant to the crew of the Eisenhower. Two Zulfiqar missiles, two SM-3 Block IIA intercepts, both destroyed above the atmosphere. The Eisenhower's flight deck lights came on at 10:28 p.m. for the night launch cycle, right on schedule. What happened next demonstrated something important about the nature of the Houthi threat and the American response architecture's layered depth. At 10:14 p.m., the E-2D Hawkeye detected a third inbound track. Not a ballistic missile this time, but a Houthi anti-ship cruise missile, a medium-range subsonic weapon launched from the Yemeni coast, while the defensive focus had been on the ballistic missile engagement. The cruise missile was 94 nautical miles out, sea skimming at 15 meters altitude, heading southwest toward the strike group. It was, in the classical sense of the term, a saturation attempt. Use the ballistic missiles to draw and expend high-tier interceptors, then send the lower-cost cruise missile in behind them as the defenses are potentially depleted and reorganizing. The E-2D crew had the contact immediately. Link 16 updated across the formation. USS Mason, which had not expended any of its VLS inventory during the ballistic missile engagement, was in the best intercept geometry, 38 nautical miles from the inbound cruise missile's track. The Mason's TAO assigned an SM-2 Block IIIB from the ship's ready magazine. The SM-2 left the rail at 10:17 p.m., climbed to intercept altitude, acquired the inbound cruise missile on its semi-active radar seeker, guided by Mason's illumination radar, and intercepted at 27 nautical miles. The cruise missile detonated over the Red Sea in a brief flash of jet fuel and warhead caisson that the E-2D crew logged on their optical sensors, and the Mason's crew never saw with their own eyes because it was 27 nautical miles away in the dark. 3 Houthi weapons, 2 ballistic missiles and 1 cruise missile, 3 intercepts, 0 hits, 0 damage. The entire 3-weapon engagement sequence had unfolded over 27 minutes, from the first Zulfiqar launch at 9:41 p.m. to the SM-2 intercept of the cruise missile at 10:17 p.m., and at no point had the USS Dwight D on Eisenhower altered her course, changed her speed, delayed a launch cycle, or given any indication to the crew working on her flight deck and in her engineering spaces that anything unusual had occurred. From the perspective of the 300 people working the 10:30 p.m. launch cycle, it was an ordinary night. Let's dwell on that for a moment, because it is the most important thing about this engagement and about what the United States Navy's ballistic missile defense architecture actually represents. The Houthis are not a sophisticated nation-state military. They are a non-state armed group that has, through Iranian patronage and technical support, acquired weapons that would have been state-of-the-art for a mid-tier nation 20 years ago. The Zulfiqar is a real missile with real capability. It is not a toy. It could kill people if it reached its target. The cruise missile supplement to the attack showed operational sophistication. The layered, multi-domain attack concept is the right tactical approach against a layered defensive system. These were not incompetent operators. They were doing the right things, in the right order, with the best weapons available to them, and none of it was close to sufficient. The gap between the Houthi offensive capability and the American defensive capability is not a matter of degree. It is a matter of category. The SM-3 Block IIA exists in a technological category that the Houthi weapons program, or the Iranian weapons program that supports it, cannot access. The Aegis Combat Systems integration of the AN/T-PY-2 ground radar, the E-2D Hawkeye's air picture, and the shipborne SPY-1B radar into a single coherent ballistic missile defense picture is an achievement that required billions of dollars, decades of engineering work, and the sustained institutional commitment of the world's most capable defense industrial base. The ballistic missile defense system that the United States has deployed in the Red Sea theater is not an improvised response to the Houthi ballistic missile threat. It is a system that was designed, tested, and fielded specifically to defeat exactly this class of threat in exactly this operational environment against exactly this type of missile. Tehran spent years putting ballistic missiles in Houthi hands. The United States spent the same years and considerably more money putting SM-3 Block IIA interceptors in American VLS cells. The Houthi missile program's spokesman announced the operation as a successful ballistic missile strike against the American carrier within 2 hours of the engagement. No damage assessment was offered because no damage had occurred. The announcement cited the launch as evidence that Yemen's armed forces possess the capability to strike American warships wherever they operate. The statement was technically accurate in a narrow sense. The Houthis do possess ballistic missiles capable of being aimed at American carriers. What the statement declined to address was what happens to those missiles after they are aimed, which is that they are destroyed above the atmosphere by a system that is now demonstrated in live operational conditions repeatedly against multiple Houthi ballistic missile launches over the course of the Red Sea deployment. That its performance matches its design specifications with a consistency that makes the Houthi ballistic missile threat against carrier strike groups not a tactical problem, but a tactical irrelevance. The Eisenhower's night launch cycle proceeded on schedule at 10:30 p.m. 12 aircraft off the deck in 11 minutes, the electromagnetic catapult cycling with the smooth, powerful efficiency of the most advanced carrier aviation system ever built. A-18S and A-18G growlers climbing into the Red Sea knot on the missions that would continue the sustained pressure on Houthi military infrastructure that had been the strike group's operational purpose for 51 days. The SM-3 cells expended in the intercepts were logged for resupply from the next logistics vessel. The TAO's engagement log was transmitted up the chain for analysis and incorporation into the continuously updated Houthi ballistic missile threat database that the ballistic missile defense community maintains and refines after every engagement. Every Zulfiqar the Houthis fire, whether it is intercepted or, in the hypothetical world where American defensive systems failed, reached its target, tells the United States Navy something about the missile's performance characteristics, guidance logic, maneuver capability, and signature. The SM-3 kill vehicle's terminal infrared seeker and the AN/TPY, two radar collect and transmit that data automatically. The Houthi ballistic missile program is, in operational terms, an involuntary test and evaluation program that is making the American missile defense system more effective with every launch. This is not a dynamic that favors the Houthi strategic position over time. The Red Sea remained open. The Eisenhower remained on station. The Bab el-Mandeb remained under American protective coverage. And somewhere in the Yemeni highlands, a Houthi launch crew was breaking down their TEL equipment and dispersing before the next American strike aircraft arrived overhead, having contributed 2 Zulfiqar missiles to the database of an adversary that now knows their weapon slightly better than it did 20 minutes before the launch. The stars over the Red Sea at midnight are extraordinary. They always are. Below them, on the flight deck of the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, the recovery cycle was bringing the night's first sorties back aboard with the controlled, precise violence of arrested carrier landings. Hook catching wire, aircraft stopping in under 3 seconds from 150 miles per hour. The deck crew moving with the practiced speed of people who have done this in the dark for weeks. Above the flight deck, 91 kilometers up in the cold silence of near space, the debris of 2 Zulfiqar missiles was spreading and falling and burning, becoming nothing, on its way back down through an atmosphere that would finish what the SM-3 had started. 2 missiles fired, 2 missiles gone. Not a scratch on the ship. The night carried on. Bye for now.